Hi everybody, very welcome to Mentour and yet another video podcast. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. Today on the video, guys, we're going to be talking about whether or not an aircraft can fly with known broken parts, like things that are not working. If they can, is there any difference between if it happens on the ground or if it happens in flight? What is an MEL, a CDL and a DDPG? Stay tuned.
Wind 31016, everyone right, put on.
Clear to land 31 right. Delta 260, just reduced.
This video is brought to you together with Brilliant. So if you're like me and you want to constantly improve yourself and maybe work on areas that you're not that good at, like in my case, maths and physics maybe, and problem solving, well, in that case, I highly recommend you to check out Brilliant. I do that together with my oldest son, Lucas. He really loves especially the problem solving part. And you can do it on either a laptop, a desktop, or their fantastic mobile app. Those of you who use this link here below will get a 20% discount on the annual fee of Brilliant, but it's completely free to go and check it out. And if you want to support me by supporting my sponsor, then go down and have a look at it. I think you'll like it. Alright guys, so this is a video that I've been longing to do for quite a while. I've had a lot of questions about what happens if you find out that something is broken in the flight, or what happens if you come to the aircraft and you see that the APU is not working, or how do you actually deal with it? So that's what we're going to be covering today, and I'm going to divide it into two different parts. The first part is, what if something happens while you're on the ground, or it happens in flight and then you have to depart for another flight. The other part is what happens in flight, right? How do you deal with them? Because they are quite different. So to begin with, we'll start with what happens on the ground. First of all, part of my responsibility as a captain when it comes to the pre-flight, before we start flying anywhere, is to check the technical status of the aircraft. And I can do that both when I'm home, I have my electronic flight bag, and when I get my flight plans, the technical status of the aircraft would be stated there as well. So I can go in and I can see if there's anything that is wrong with the aircraft that we know about. Then, when I get out to the aircraft, the first thing that I will do, almost when I get into the cockpit, is to take the technical log out, and I will go in and I will look to the previous flight to see on the technical page if there's something that's been entered by the previous captain, and I will go into the hold item list. Now, the hold item list in the tech log is at the back of the tech log, and it tells me whether or not there are known faults in the aircraft, components that are not working. Well, now you're asked, well, how come, can you fly an aircraft where you have stuff that is not working? How does that work? The fact is that an aircraft is obviously part of a commercial operation, and it has to keep running as long as possible. But it cannot do so if the safety is compromised. All right? Under no circumstances ever do we compromise safety. But of course, there are parts of the aircraft that are not safety critical. Take, for example, a forward toilet. Or there might even be a system that has two separate components where if one breaks, the other one works perfectly. Well, then you'll be able to continue to operate the aircraft safely. But the problem here is that me and my colleague, we are only pilots. We don't have the technical know-how to assess exactly how a certain component is going to affect the safety of the flight. But Boeing does, all right? And Boeing has done separate risk assessments on every single system and part that's part of the aircraft. And they put that into something called an MEL, a minimum equipment list. So if I get out to the aircraft and I find that actually we have a problem with an air conditioning pack. All right, the air conditioning pack is part of the air conditioning system. It is one out of a two-part system that provides air conditioning and pressurization for the aircraft. Well, in that case, that will be written into the hold item list. And who does that then? Well, this is where it becomes a little bit complicated. But the fact is that if for example, the previous captain had a problem with one of the air conditioning packs during the previous flight, when he or she comes down and parks the aircraft, they need to immediately write that into the tech log. Any failure that you've experienced during the flight, it might be a GPWS fault light, or it might be an instrument flag, or it might be something else, has to be entered into the tech log, right? You have to write it down. This is nothing like, oh no, we'll wait with that and we'll do it next flight when we come home. No, it has to be immediately entered into the tech log. And as soon as he or she does that, the aircraft is automatically grounded. Right? No matter how small the failure is, if it's a light bulb that's missing and I put it into the tech log, that grounds the aircraft. Right? Then the pilot has to call our maintenance control units, and that's a unit with engineers that are sitting in a base somewhere, in order to tell them that this has happened. They will then take up the minimum equipment list. The pilot would have done the same, and they would read through, okay, how will this affect the flight? Normally the MEL, the way it's written, is it tells the pilots and engineers how many systems there is. So in case of the pack, for example, there are 2 packs, and then how many is required for dispatch. In this case, it's 1 required, and then what the restrictions are, right? So the pilot will be getting instructions from the engineers. In this case, you can dispatch. So even if there's no engineer available that can rectify the fault, the pilot will be able to do what's called a verbatim heel release. So the engineering department will say, okay, yes, you will be able to depart providing that you follow these restrictions. And this is how you write it in the tech log. We just follow exactly what they're saying. We write it into the tech log, transfer it to the hold item list in the back of the tech log so that the next pilot will know about it. And then, providing that it's not a safety critical item or that it can be handled safely, we can then dispatch the aircraft. But without the engineering department being there and giving us this heel release, we cannot do it. And in some cases, we can't do it at all. We need them to fly in an engineer or to get an engineer from another base or something like that. And this is when you guys get a technical delay. That's when something has happened and we need engineering to come and fix it. And if that's the case, that's because Boeing has decided that this particular part needs to be rectified before you can do the flight safely. All right? There's no question about it, and we never question this. So this is what might happen then. I might come in and I might see that, okay, so the previous captain had the problem with the pack. It has been released to service, but the hold item list item is open. It has not been rectified. Well, in that case, I will have to find out, how does this affect me? What am I going to do now? And in the case of the pack, for example, the MEL has a restriction to how high we're allowed to fly with only 1 pack. And it says you can fly up to 26,000 feet, right? Okay, I need to know this because I then need to make sure that the flight planning department knows about this so that they can issue a new flight plan that limits the aircraft to 26,000 feet. That's going to give us a higher fuel burn, and it might not let us into certain areas, certain military areas, things like that. So it might have to change the entire flight plan. But apart from that, I also need to go into something called the Dispatch Deviation Procedure Guide, the DDPG. And that's the second part of the MEL. So the MEL will state how many systems do we have, how many do we require for dispatch, what are the limitations. The DDPG will then tell the pilots, how do you actually operate with this? How do you move the switches? Do you turn the pack switch off? Does it need to be an in-up sticker there? How do you do in case this happens? So it gives us a procedure to follow. And that's very good, because without that, you would have a lot of different pilots doing a lot of different things, which is not what you want. So this gives us kind of a checklist for how to deal with it. And this goes for everything. It might be if you have anti-skidding up, which is a horrible fault to have, by the way, or something else. It will always tell you what to do and how to do it. All right? So then I will brief my co-pilot that we have this fault. We will see how that's going to impact the operation. We will brief, okay, what's the threat associated with this, how we're going to deal with it, and here is a checklist. Let's keep the DDPG open. And then we can dispatch, providing that we have the new flight plan. All right? So it's a very, very controlled system. How do, what failure do you have? Can you dispatch with it, yes or no? If you can dispatch with it, what is the procedure? Do you implement it into the flight plan? Okay? Now there might be other things to think about as well. So some systems, for example, will have performance limitations on our takeoff and landing. We can, for example, depart with a thrust reverser that's not working. And in that case, you are going to have some implications on operating on a wet runway. And on our performance tool, there is an MEL button, and we can go in and we can choose that this system is inop, and that will then automatically apply the limitations to our performance calculations. But once again, it's all about us having the situational awareness needed in order to make sure that we implement all of these things, because there could be, if you are unlucky, there could be maybe 1 or 2 or 3 items, and sometimes they all have different performance implications, and at some point it might not be safe to continue the operation with, like, these individual items could go separately, but together they give, a picture which is not good, and in that case we don't operate. We get an engineer, we sort out at least the most critical ones, and we make sure that the aircraft continue to operate in a safe manner. That's all that we care about, and that is my responsibility as a captain. Okay? Great. So that's how we deal with the MEL and the DDPG when we are on the ground. So the next thing that I want to talk about, of course, then is what happens if the same failure happens in the air. Well, in that case, we're not limited by the MEL anymore. All right? The MEL is only prior to dispatch. Once we've started pushing back the aircraft and we're starting our engines, then we are limited by the Quick Reference Handbook. The Quick Reference Handbook is different from the MEL. All right? It will give us a procedure to follow in case we have a system failure. And while the MEL gives you a little bit of margin, so in case of the pack failure, for example, it wanted to limit our flight level to 26,000 feet. The QRH does not do that. The QRH will look at how does this system failure impact the flight. In the case of a pack, for example, we have 2 of them, and each of them can pressurize the aircraft safely up to our maximum certified altitude of 41,000 feet. So in that case, if I have a pack failure, I go in here, I look at air systems, which is chapter number 2. I look at pack, which is 212. It will only say, all right, choose one. One pack light extinguishes on master caution reset, or pack light does not extinguish on master caution reset, go to step 2. Then it will just give us steps in order to try to regain the operation of the pack, but it doesn't tell us to descend down to 26,000 feet. And the reason for that is because when it comes to the Quick Reference Handbook, it knows that you're in flight. And if you have to operate at 26,000 feet, that means that you might not have enough fuel on board to get to your destination, right? QRH knows that one pack is perfectly safe to continue to operate at the flight level you are, and then you just descend in. So while the MEL gives you a bit of margins, the QRH just makes sure that it keeps you safe, that you try to rectify the problem if it's possible, and then that the system is configured properly for continuing the flight. Okay? So that is the difference. So if, for example, the same thing would happen to me. So I am up flying, I get a pack failure of some sort in flight, I do the QRH items, I secure the system. Then as I land and I taxi in, I now know that as soon as I put the parking brake on, I'm going to have to put this into the tech log. And for the next flight, if I want to fly back home again and there's no engineering available, there is going to be a limitation on the flight level on the way back. So that's what I do. I put it into the tech log. I contact the maintenance control unit. We put this all down to the tech log. Then I contact the flight planning department. I get a new flight plan for 26,000 feet. And then I can operate back, hopefully. Okay, so you see the difference here. But what I want to get to here, really, guys, is that it all is dependent on safety. It's never anything random. We always operate, using, the PIOC. We find out what the problem is. We get as much information as possible. And by the way, that includes when you're in flight, even though I am not limited by the MEL, even though the MEL doesn't stop me from operating, I can still go in and open up the MEL and the DDPG so that I get some hints about what kind of limitations I'll be getting on my next flight, so that I can plan for that for the flight that's coming up. All right? There's a lot of good information, especially inside of the DDPG, that you won't get in the QRH. So while the QRH is the limiting part, I would still read the other in order to get as much information as possible as part of the PIOC: problem, information, option, select, execute, and evaluate. All right? Cool. So that's what we do. Now, there is one third thing that I haven't talked about, and that is the configuration deviation list. So the MEL, that covers all of the internal systems. We're talking about lighting, emergency equipment, packs, air conditioning, all of these kind of things are covered in the MEL. But there are external things as well. So for example, hubcaps and rubber seals and static discharges and stuff that are parts of the outside components of the aircraft. These are not in the MEL, but they are in the CDL, which is similar. So in case of, for example, a missing hubcap, let's say that for some reason the engineers had to remove the hubcap on one of the main wheels. Well, if you've seen my video about why we don't have doors on the 737, I highly recommend you to check that out. It's an old video, but it's good. You know that the hubcaps are actually the aerodynamic seal. When the main landing gear has been retracted, it's the aerodynamic seal that keeps the airflow. So that means that if we remove the hubcap, it's not going to flow as well. There's going to be extra drag on the aircraft. And the CDL will tell us that yes, you're allowed to operate without one hubcap, but if you do, there's going to be, let's say, for example, a 2.5% increase in fuel burn. So once again, that has to put into the flight plan so that we get a higher fuel burn represented, so we know what the minimum fuel are before we dispatch. So this is why all of these things can be found in either the MEL, the DDPG, which is part of the MEL, and the CDL, the configuration deviation list. Make sense? With me so far? Cool. So this is the way that we work, all right? So there's a difference between if we find it on the ground before we dispatch, the MEL, when we're in flight, the QRH. But in any circumstance, safety is always paramount. Safety is our priority 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? And I, as a captain, am the one that is responsible for this. I am always responsible for the safety and well-being on everyone on board. This means that I have to make sure that the aircraft is airworthy before I go. So to answer the questions from the beginning of the video, can an aircraft operate with broken parts? The answer is yes. Certain part we can operate with. But it has to be verified. All right? It is not me who just says, that'll be fine. I'm sure that's going to be, we don't really need that thing anyway. No, this goes through the engineering department. It goes through Boeing. And if there's any doubt at any point anywhere whether or not this is going to be safe or not, there's no doubt. The aircraft stays on the ground. We get an engineer there that rectifies the fault, and then we go. And in my experience, in my airline, I fly with aircraft that are very, very well maintained. We have a fantastic engineering department. I very rarely see any hold item list items at all. There's very rarely anything. If there is, it's something from the previous flight, and it's because the engineer at my base, for example, didn't have the certification needed in order to rectify maybe a radio. There are special ratings for engineers, so some engineers can rectify certain faults, but you might need a higher rating in order to go in for things like avionics. So that's when we tend to have whole item lists, but very rarely do we have anything, and I've almost never had combination of faults, right? The engineering department is fantastic, and a big kudos to you guys and the work that you do for us if you're sitting here watching. That's all I had, guys. I hope that you have more questions about this. You can file them in the comments below. I hope that you have subscribed, that I have earned a subscription to the channel, guys, and that you've highlighted the little notification bells, because I will be producing more content. I'll be doing live streams, and in order for you to know that I'm doing that, you need to have the little notification bell highlighted. All right? Once again, I want you to go and check out the sponsor to this episode, which is Brilliant. I want you to support my channel by supporting them, because they definitely support me. And as always, an enormous thank you to the members of my Patreon crew. You guys are awesome. The reason I'm doing this episode today was because I sent out a question to my patrons, which one out of several suggested videos they wanted me to do, and this is the one they chose. So that's the kind of things that you will get to be part of if you're part of the Patreon crew, guys. I really, really highly appreciate all the help that I get from my Patreon crew. And yeah, that's it. Have an absolutely fantastic day wherever you are out there, guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Right, guys, I really hope that you liked that. If you want more content like that, more aviation content, well then, check this out. I hope that you have subscribed to the channel and that you've highlighted the little notification bell. See you inside of the Mentour Aviation app and have an absolutely fantastic day. Bye-bye.